All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to join us this morning, both here in person and on Zoom. We have a lot of people on Zoom, so we got to remember that they're there and say hi to them every once in a while. But thanks to everyone for joining us here this morning. We have a really interesting panel for you on the impact of the war in Ukraine on the world's agricultural supply chain and global food security. I'm Liz Hare. I'm going to be your moderator today. I am a member of the board of the World Affairs Council. For those of you who have never heard of the World Affairs Council, our mission is to connect St. Louis to the world and the world to St. Louis. And we do that through educational programs, through speaker series, through a partnership with the U.S. Department of State, in which we host international leaders here in St. Louis. What else do? We do cultural events, and we do events like these. So if you're interested in learning more about the World Affairs Council, you can find Seth up there afterwards. We'd love to have you join us as members. If you're on Zoom, I'm sure Seth is putting something in the chat where you can join the World Affairs Council. So we're going to get straight to the panel. I'm not going to read you everybody's bios because they're sitting in front of you at your seats, but I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to who everybody is so you know who is speaking. So first, we have Roberta Simpson-Dolbear. Roberta is the chair of the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health Committee, as part of the American Soybean Association. She is also a member of the board of directors on the American Soybean Association board. She has served on the Illinois Soybean Association board, and she farms in Illinois corn and soybeans with her family. Next, we have Gina Perry. Gina is the executive director of the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health, where she leads trade and development programs in developing and emerging economies throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And next, we have Adam Thomas. I'm going to make sure I get Adam's title right. Adam is the commercial director for both Tiger Soy in Mexico, Missouri, and Simo Milling in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Adam plays a key role in business development for Tiger Soy, which produces soy flour and other soy products, including for Simo Milling. Simo Milling is a food-grade corn milling plant that uses soy flour for its business that includes selling corn soy blend plus, which you may have heard called super cereal, to the United Nations World Food Program and other international organizations. Stephanie Reganin is the executive director of innovation partnerships at the Danforth Plant Science Center. In this role, she is working to establish and lead collaborative efforts to develop and maintain partnerships that help deliver on the Danforth Center's mission, particularly in relation to the center's role in building regional ag tech and bioscience strength. Next is Mac Marshall. Mac serves as the Vice President for Market Intelligence for the United Soybean Board. In this capacity, Mac works with USB is United Soybean Board, leadership to evaluate and establish long-term strategic initiatives in support of advancing domestic and international market opportunities for the U.S. soybean industry, while serving as an industry source of market information and analysis. So you have here on the panel representatives from various different groups. You have representatives from producers who are actually producing agricultural products, members of the U.S. agriculture industry who are engaged in trade and analysis for agriculture, producers who are actually producing the products for end consumers and designing and creating products, and then a member of the industry who is actually charged with developing cross partnerships organization-wide. And I forgot our final panelist who's on Zoom, and his name is Tom Steele. Tom is the Director of Strategy at Adestia, a nonprofit social enterprise that makes life-saving, ready-to-use foods to help end the global hunger and malnutrition crisis. Tom oversees the procurement department and works with the leadership team to identify and execute the organization's strategic priorities. So you have representatives from all kinds of different groups. You're all here because food security is important to all of us. So we're extremely grateful to WISH and to the United Soybean Board and to Danforth for helping us host this panel today and bring this information to all of you. And we're going to kick it off with Mac, who's going to give us a little bit of information about recent volatility in commodity prices and where we are today. And then we're going to go to some of the other panelists.
Well, good morning, everyone. Just want to make sure everyone on the Zoom can hear me. I can project in a room, but I guess not across bandwidth. So I want to make sure we can hear. Well, first off, as Liz said, my name is Mac Marshall. I lead market intelligence for the United Soybean Board. And here we are to talk about war in Ukraine and the impact on global food security. Now, global food security is, of course, a challenge at any time, not just today, but really throughout human history. And over the past several months, basically the last 7 months since the invasion happened, I've gotten a lot of questions about what does the war mean for the soybean market. And I think it's an interesting question, sure, but I think it really begs and underscores the importance of understanding how integrated the global food system is and how there are trade-offs and knock-on effects. That's what I want to take you through a little bit of today before we get to our STEAM panel. I'm going to take you through 5 numbers. There we go. I'm going to take you through 5 numbers that I think tell part of the story of the disruption that we've seen to global food supplies and global food security resulting from this terrible war. So first and foremost, 15%. 15%, that's the percentage of the population globally. 1.2 billion out of almost 8 billion people at the end of 2021 were in states of food insecurity. Now, food insecurity, as defined by the World Bank, and these are the definitions that I'm using, you might see different figures, but that means living on less than $3.59 a day. There are more dire tiers than that, but that's the top line we'll work with for now. 15%, 1 in 7 people. So look around the room. 1 in 7. Now that's bad enough. But as a result of the war, 441 million. That's the number of people who have become insecure between November 2021 and May 2022. Some of this is COVID hangover. Some of this is supply chain disruption hangover. It's primarily attributable to the war in Ukraine. Now, just a quick note on Ukraine. I think this is teed up well in some of the briefers that went out in advance of this session. But Ukraine is Europe's breadbasket. It is a very large producer of wheat and corn, 2 grain staples. It's a minor producer of soybeans. They only produce about 4 million tons annually. So when I get the soy question, I'm like, okay, how disruptive is this going to be for soy? Well, on balance, not a lot. We produce 120 million tons in the US, so Ukraine's dropping the bucket there. But it's the knock-on effects. As Ukraine, which is also a very large producer and exporter of sunflower seed and sunflower seed oil, as that has effectively exited the market for a period of time, now exports are back up and running through some of the deals brokered with the UN, and it's exciting to see. But it has limited the availability of vegetable oil the global market, of wheat to the global market, and corn. And many of the countries that Ukraine primarily exports to are poorer countries, low-income countries, middle-income countries across North Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. These are the markets that are being impacted. These are the markets of high population. And these are the markets that have really been suffering a lot as we've seen that global food insecurity number rise from 1.2 billion people to over 1.6 billion. 1.6 billion out of a population of 8. Now look around the room again. It was 1 out of 7 before. Now it's 1 out of 5. And those are figures for May. According to the Eurasia Group, and forecast by Grow Intelligence, which is a global analytics firm focused on agricultural productivity, we could see those ranks swell by another 250 million people up to that by November. as the stalemate continues. 191. Depending on territorial boundaries, there are about 217 countries in the world. 191 of them are experiencing food inflation at an annualized rate in excess of 5%. We're feeling that at the grocery store. We've, of course, seen inflation come in pretty high. I think grocery store prices over the last year are up close to double digits, if not slightly over. I haven't checked last week's inflation numbers, but I'll get back to that once I'm back in the office. 191 countries, many of which are incredibly price sensitive. That's staggering. And I think it's even more staggering when you consider the 82 countries that are defined as low income or low to middle income countries. You total up all of those 82 countries, that's a population of 4.1 billion people. Over half of the planet lives in countries with those low or low to middle income designations. So when you have that 5% increase in food prices globally, it's not like us bringing a $100 grocery bill up to $105. That $3.59 that people are living on, 5% increase of that means a lot less food affordability and availability. And the final number that I want to give you, 7%. There's a very cool resource out there. And I say cool simply because I think it's a good use of data and visualization and helps encapsulate the severity of the global food crisis. And it's put out by the Institute for Food Policy, or International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI. Basically what they do is they monitor trade restrictions on food, and fertilizers, things that are needed for global agricultural production and distribution. 7% of the world's calorie markets are currently facing some sort of trade restriction, be it an export quota, an increased tariff, or an outright ban on exports. Now, 7%, that might be a lot, but we're down from 15% in the immediate weeks following the Russian incursion. This compares unfavorably to the disruptions that we saw in trade and caloric distribution during COVID. It is comparable to what we saw in the food price crisis of 2007 through 2008. And I think it bears mentioning that many of these countries, many of which are located in the poorer parts of Central Asia, but India is on this list too. Now, India, we all know India has a very large population. I think it's about 1.4 billion people now. Well, India is not strictly a food importer. India is also a food exporter. And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen India implement trade restrictions on its rice, an outright ban on export of certain types of rice and limitations in terms of export quotas on other forms, brown rice, broken rice. And India accounts for 41% of global rice exports. So you put all this together. Now, as India, which is a vegetable oil importer, it sees declining availability there coming out of the Ukraine. And food security, food nationalism, food sovereignty becomes that much more important. You feed your domestic population first, but then if you're an exporter and you're not putting your surplus into those international channels, the situation compounds. It's not just the import-dependent countries that are impacted here, even exporters such as India. And I'm not trying to pick on India here. We've seen the same thing unfold in Indonesia. Now in the US, fortunately, we have the benefit of excellent producers, good logistics, and enough production surplus to continue to supply the growing world. But we're just one country of those 217. So with that, obviously, it's a very sobering topic and a somber topic, but there's still, I think, ample reason to believe in the path we have forward. And that's why I'd like to turn it over now to our esteemed panel, where you'll hear from experts from many different parts of the food supply chain and what they are doing from each of their different distinct positions to help nurture and grow the world so that we can build a more resilient food system, so that I don't have to give a presentation like this again with these numbers. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Max. So as Max said, we're going to shift to what we're all doing to try to make an impact on the numbers. So Gina, we're going to shift to you. Can you tell us why an organization like WISH is working in global food security as well as trade and development?
Sure, thanks, Liz. So like Liz mentioned, I work for the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health. We call it WISH for short. We're a program of the American Soybean Association. So we're actually located, if you just keep going down Olive and past 270, you'll end up at our office. And so our goal is to strengthen agricultural value chains across developing and emerging markets to create long-term trade and market development for U.S. soy. And we do this through the improvement of nutrition, health, and food security. So we work in 28 countries across Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Many of those countries that Mac was referencing that are experiencing high food insecurity. So when we talk about food security, an easy way to kind of wrap your head around what that means is making sure that every person at every time has access to affordable food. So while global food security is a complex system and there's a lot of challenges and factors, if you think about affordable and accessible food, that's really what wraps into global food security. Many of our countries also experience what we call a protein gap. So that means there's more protein being demanded than what can be produced locally. And so WISH kind of helps to fill that gap. So we do this through working through poultry feed, aquaculture feed, human food. We want to make sure that there's affordable and accessible protein available to these populations. So working to build value chains, those create resilient food systems and also contribute to higher food security. So like Mac mentioned, there's a lot of factors at play right now. So we had transportation challenges, logistical challenges, COVID, famine that's happening right now in the Horn of Africa. Other crises throughout Latin America, the Middle East, and then you add the war in Ukraine on top of that. So it's really making this food insecurity spike around the world. So food security is actually part of the new WISH strategic plan. Our farmers got together and said, soy is not being involved in these food security conversations. Whether that was intentional or not, we know that soy is a complete protein that can help provide a solution around the world. So we started having this conversation led by our grower leaders like Roberta. And it really complements the work also being done by United Soybean Board. Their new vision is to create sustainable soy solutions to every life, every day. And there's a huge human health and animal health and nutrition component of that. And so that really plays well into what WISH was already doing. So we've been talking about food security for many years and working in that space, but it's becoming even more and more important given all the challenges throughout the world. Through our USB funding, we were able to develop thought leader meetings with people both in the agricultural industry as well as other nonprofits and organizations that are also working towards the same goal. So we were able to start brainstorming, connecting with different organizations like Adizia. You'll hear from Tom later on. And we were actually able to make a trip up to their factory in Rhode Island back in December. So we took some of our grower leaders. We had representatives from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Agency for International Development, members of academia. We were able to see what Adizia was doing, tour their factory, talk to many of their employees. Many of them came from countries that experience high food insecurity. And then also have a roundtable of how can we as, a soy industry, how can we as, global food security organizations really address this topic? And so it's been a great partnership, and it's one that brought many of us together multiple times throughout the past year to continue these conversations and host panels like this. So we know that protein is important. It's been a growing conversation in many of these developing emerging economies. As incomes continue to rise, despite before all the challenges that the world is facing, people want to buy more protein as their income increases. And so I actually lived and worked in Ghana and West Africa for several years. And it's funny, I lived in a city, but the first day I was walking to work, there was a billboard sponsored by United Soybean Board and the U.S. Poultry Export Council. And it was encouraging Ghanaians to eat more chicken. And it was funny because I worked for United Soybean Board when I worked at a marketing agency here. So it was fun to be halfway across the world and see their presence. So it's not a new conversation of wanting, consumers to eat more protein in these markets, but it's growing even more important as we face these challenges throughout the world. So WISH's work to create more accessible and affordable protein, like I mentioned, we work in aquaculture development in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. We also work with poultry producers, both with poultry and aquaculture. We aim to produce high quality feed using soy as the protein source. We also work in human food and beverages throughout sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So finding new ways to put US soy into these products and create new markets for US soy. So we'll continue to create pathways and partnerships to address global food security along with many of the stakeholders that you see on this panel. So I'll turn it back to you, Liz.
All right, thanks, Gina. So next we have Roberta. Roberta has been involved with WISH for 6 years now, and you've traveled with the organization to Central America. So can you explain to us why an organization like WISH and this food security work is so important to every US soybean grower?
Thank you. Yeah. WISH, as Gina mentioned too, WISH is very important to throughout the world because we farmers, US farmers, have the opportunity to see how they connect with trade and development in these countries that are looking for ways to improve their protein content in their daily food. And as Gina mentioned, 22 years ago, a group of visionary farmers saw a need for helping others throughout the world, and they developed WISH. And today, we're working with in countries throughout the world to help improve that food security situation. I had the opportunity a few years ago to travel with WISH to Central America, where we actually got to see the manufacturing or firms and organizations that are using soy flour in their key products. And this is making a great difference in the nutrition of all ages there, as those products are becoming available in supermarkets. Their government is working to include soy packed protein food in schools, hospitals, and more. So that was a real eye-opener. And these businesses that we visited are using US soy, and their demand for US soy continues to increase. So that's encouraging to US farmers. And the thing too that we realized and heard from some of those businesses and organizations that we visited is that they see the US soy as a complete protein. We have a quality product to offer them. I also had the opportunity to visit Adesia last December, and that was a real interesting visit to learn about what all they're doing in the world to help fight hunger and malnutrition. They currently are using 7.5 million pounds of soy flour, and fortunately, the US government has recently announced more food security commitments, which is projected to double the amount of soy flour that they'll be using this coming year. This sets the stage for even greater US soy in Adesia's life-giving products. We farmers see the need or the opportunity for US soy demand to continue over the next several years, which is encouraging from a marketing standpoint, that we have opportunity not only to sell more of our product, but to know that we're doing good throughout the world with that product. I think too, it's important to realize that WISH gives U.S. soy farmers an opportunity to sit at the table for important discussions that mean more demand for our crop. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for and continued improvement as far as collaborations between U.S. soybean growers and for with these countries that are looking for opportunities to better feed their people. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. Adam, can you tell us about how Tiger Soy and SEMO Milling process U.S. soy and corn into products to be sold to groups such as the World Food Program to fight food insecurity?
Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for having me up here. So, SEMO Milling, we process the corn soy blend that Liz referenced earlier and super cereals that go over to World Food Program through USAID and then to other non-governmental agencies throughout the world. Tiger Soy over here in Mexico, Missouri is where we are processing that soy flour. It's a very, very intricate process. You know, it's not just grinding up a soybean into a flour, right? We have to deactivate the enzyme activity in that soybean. We have to put it through a validated kill step. We have to then maintain that level of quality and sanitation throughout the process until we have it loaded and blended and packaged, where it will then be tested again before it's going to get on the big boat and head across the ocean, right? So it is a very difficult process when you are thinking about soy processing in general. You know, a big crush plant's going to do 100,000 bushels a day. They're really going for the oil right now, of course, and then the meal. We're essentially doing the same thing, minus the hexane extraction. Pardon me. And then we're taking that higher fat soy flour and we're going to grind that down. Higher fat soy meal and grind that down into a flour. So it's kind of a specialized process. It's a specialized plant. We were lucky enough to find that plant sitting here in the state of Missouri. It had been built about 10 years ago and it kind of been shuttered, and we were looking for another source of soy flour and brought that online. And we're in about 2.5 years into this thing right now. And if projects and volume keeps going like it is throughout the world, we're probably going to be chewing up about 600,000 bushels of Missouri soybeans and turning those into flours that are going to go into these products. So, you know, they've mentioned several times the funding that's coming behind this and what is pushing it forward. You know, I was in Africa in May and got to tour a lot of the agencies in Kenya and the non-governmental agencies that are there distributing and going out to the refugee camps in the northern part of the country and up in towards Ethiopia and places like that. The need is there, obviously. We know that. We talked about Ukraine, right? We've all seen this train coming down the tracks going, how are we going to feed these people if those normal grain flows aren't continuing? We were also lucky enough to sit in the World Food Program in Rome and sit right in the same room like we are now with the heads of World Food. I don't know how we got that meeting because we've been trying to talk to those people for a decade and you can't get that meeting, right? But we did, and their position was very matter of fact. We will take all you can give. That was their position to the United States, because we were, of course, over there saying, how do we do more? How do we get more access to the market and to World Food and to go to these other places? And they just flat told us, in-kind donations, we'll take all you can give. So, you know, it starts all the way back. I'm the second link in the chain, I guess. Roberta's the first, right? Or if you want to go all the way back to the breeders here, maybe that's the first link in the chain. But it all has to work in concert. And when we start talking about, and I'm not going to steal much of Tom's thunder here, because he can talk about how hard it is to make the product that they're putting out and the limitations there. But you know, if our producers aren't maintaining their crop from the day they harvest it until the day they deliver it, it's not going to work. You know, we have to hit yeast and mold targets that are less than 100. If you have ever done anything in microbiology, anything less than 100 is a zero, basically. That's how you figure those when you start talking about reductions in logs. So it's very hard to produce and hard to maintain and hard to get there but it's absolutely necessary to do all that because you're going into populations that maybe are immune compromised at the same time, right? So we have to have that premium product, and no one's better at doing that than the United States and our producers and our processors. They can buy some of these products elsewhere in the world. The Dutch are making the super cereal. They're trying to make the same thing in country, in Africa. They don't make it the way we make it. So it's extremely important that we keep those supply chains moving.
Thanks, Adam. All right, we're going to shift to Tom, who's on Zoom. Tom, can you tell us about Odysseus operations and how the company depends on U.S. farmers?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I've got deep St. Louis roots, and it really pains me today that I wasn't able to join you in person. So that my thanks to the panelists and the World Affairs Council for letting me join you virtually. So Odysseus has been referenced a few times by the panelists today. And just as background for those in the audience who may not know, we are a Rhode Island, it's a state, it's a small one, New England, based manufacturer of ready-to-use therapeutic food. Plumpy Nut is the name that's commonly referred to as. It's this little tiny packet with about 500 kilocalories in it. It is a perfectly formulated blend of peanuts, oil, sugars, dairy proteins, vitamins, and minerals. And important to this discussion has been referenced a number of times, soy. A malnourished child, of which there are now nearly 50 million in the world, eats one of those packets for every meal a day. So about 3 packets per day for about 6 weeks. And they undergo this dramatic and miraculous transformation from being a sickly child on death's doorstep to a child just like mine, just like yours. And the transformation is just truly remarkable. About 15 years ago in 2007, after more than a decade of research and development, much of which happened in St. Louis at Washington University by Dr. Mark Maneri, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the UN Standing Committee on Nutrition stood up together and declared RUTF to be the gold standard treatment for the treatment of malnourished children. And with this declaration, what it did is countries around the world, those in the Sahel, those in Eastern Africa, began to incorporate this treatment into their national protocols. And this in turn gave birth to an industry, but more importantly, gave birth to the opportunity to offer hope to millions and millions of children who would not have had it otherwise. At the very highest of levels, there are 3 big agencies that are involved in the procurement and distribution of these products: the World Food Program, UNICEF, and USAID. We manufacture, but these entities transport the products to the countries that need them. And then once in country, the products are either given in kind to the government or not NGOs, or they're distributed through their own programs. And it was really for USAID that Odysseus was born. So we're an American manufacturer, and USAID uses taxpayer monies to buy these products. And so the grand bargain is that we in turn support American farmers by bringing their materials into our factory. But as Adam referenced, even if we didn't have to do this, we would do this. It is in our interest to do this. There is a level of advancement and development in the American agricultural supply chains that our partners around the world do not have. If they wanted to scale, if they needed to scale as they're being asked to do, the first thing that they have to look at is, can their supply chain support it? And in many instances, they can't, but ours can. So as part of this bargain, our dairy comes from New England. Our peanuts come from Georgia and the Carolinas. Our sugar comes from Louisiana and Florida. And our soy, it comes from the Midwest. And with every one of our suppliers who we refer to as partners, we impress upon them that they are a key actor in this fight against malnutrition and the fight on behalf of the world's most vulnerable children. As Mac presented at the very beginning of the panel, the crisis in Ukraine is having ripple effects throughout the world, but as is always the case, the most vulnerable are those who are feeling the brunt of the effects. And where hunger rises, malnutrition follows. As Roberta mentioned, what's encouraging is that the recent announcement by USAID Administrator Samantha Power of an unprecedented influx of funding specifically targeted to the procurement and distribution of RUTF to the Horn of Africa, to the Sahel, and to the other parts of the world affected, not just by the Ukraine crisis, but by climate change, by political violence, by the many things that affect and really contribute to rates of childhood malnutrition. This is an unprecedented level of funding, and it's all new money that's coming into this industry. And what that means for Adicea is that we literally cannot produce enough. Every minute that we're not manufacturing these packets is a child that's not getting this food. And that's the first time that's ever happened. It has never been such that our capacity is needed and then some, but that is the case right now. And it is our sincere hope and wish that this level of increased funding, which benefits everybody, the dairy farmers of New England, the peanut farmers of Georgia, the soy farmers of the Midwest, that this level of increased funding is sustained. And it is a mere drop in the bucket of the federal budget. And it goes to treating the world's most vulnerable children. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the panelists.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. Finally, we're going to go to Stephanie. So Stephanie, can you tell us about Danforth's commitment to food security through research and also through your relationships with many people in this community?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz. Welcome everyone to the Danforth Plant Science Center. I'm sure some of you have been here before. I see some familiar faces. One of the beautiful things about the pandemic somewhat waning is that we're able to do these things again in person. We have missed you here at the Danforth Center. This building and these buildings were built to convene, and we do a lot of different public engagements where we bring people in, smart people who care about big global issues like climate change and like food security, and we have these conversations. So we're really, really thrilled and proud to have you here this morning. I work in the partnership space here at the Danforth Plant Science Center. So I always like to clarify that I am not a research scientist. I am a political scientist, which is the furthest thing from an actual scientist. However, I have this super cool job where I get to not just cheerlead the scientific community that works here. So there's 400 people that work in this space here at the Danforth Center, and more than 300 of them are actual scientists. I get to not only cheerlead their work, but I try to tie their work out into the regional community and the global community and try to get these tools and technologies into the hands of farmers. And so I've worked in ag for over 20 years. And this job is kind of a culmination of all the things I've done from small company agriculture, big company agriculture, and trade associations. I want to say something just in terms of our global view and global work, but I also want to bring it back to St. Louis because I know this particular crowd is very passionate about St. Louis and building St. Louis. So clearly the foundational science that we do here at the Danforth Plant Science Center helps different kinds of crops, and lots of different crops actually, be more resilient to things like climate change, be more resistant to things like pests and disease. And that's very important, right? And again, this is a multitude of crops across, across the globe, frankly, global impact for sure. One of the things that we do here that we're very proud of, though, is our focus on orphan crops. So those are things like cassava and cowpea that are very important in the global south and some of these countries that we keep kind of talking about that were vulnerable before the pandemic. They were vulnerable because of supply chain issues. They're certainly vulnerable because of the issues in Ukraine. And so we're very proud of that work. And we have a whole center called the IICI, the International Institute for Crop Improvement. This is really, the focus of that institute. But everything that we touch here at the Danforth Center from a foundational research perspective, goes to kind of guide that work as well. For those of you who may not know about the mission of the Danforth Plant Science Center, I do just really quick want to speak to this before I talk about the things that we're doing here in St. Louis that I think are really cool. So we want to improve the human condition through plant science, just a slightly small, maybe super noble goal, founded by a gentleman named Dr. Bill Danforth many years ago, over about 25 years ago, actually, with some friends and peers and colleagues, some of whom are in this room, to say, how can we make St. Louis a global epicenter for plant science? And our vision points are this, to, food security and human health, preserving and renewing the environment. And the third one that makes us truly unique, in my opinion, is building St. Louis as this global center for plant science. And that's actually not super common for nonprofits to focus on, but it is absolutely core to what we do. The fact that there is a role in this institution like mine that is trying to commercialize not just technologies spinning out of the Danforth Center, but recruiting companies into this region to help this whole thing, grow and be relevant is pretty cool. So a couple things that I think St. Louis really has a leg up, frankly, from a research and innovation perspective. We are in the heart of the heartland, right? So we are right here where I think it's 50% of our entire country's agriculture production is within 500 miles of where you are sitting. 80% of our country's corn and soybean production is within 500 miles of where we are sitting. So when you think about trying to make sure the arc between grower and innovator is strong, that arc comes right here through St. Louis. We not only have several of our farmer-facing organizations and trade associations headquartered right here, we have a lot of industry here, right? The one right across the street, Bayer, but there are others. Anheuser-Busch, Post Holdings, Purina, many, many others. We also are a transportation and logistics hub with our rivers and our highways. St. Louis is very relevant regionally, nationally, and globally as it relates to this conversation. We always have been, and we are doubling down on that. The second thing is, and you've maybe heard about this, you all are folks that I think probably pay attention to the news, is the fact that while we have this, multi-decade expertise in ag tech and bioscience, we have a burgeoning new industry in geospatial, right? It starts with a $2 billion investment in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency downtown. But over those couple of years, what has been really cool to watch play out is that people said, hey, we did this right once before. This vision for St. Louis to be an epicenter of something, right? And this is this ag tech bioscience space that we're kind of sitting in the middle of right now. How can we model this new geospatial opportunity after that? And literally in their plans, they point to what we did right in bioscience and agriculture as a reason to believe we can do this right in geospatial, and we are doing it right in geospatial. What I get excited about, because I know nothing about geospatial, including how to define it, I just get really excited as a community builder, is that what is that vertical that we're really good at that is actually very tied to geospatial already? Oh, thank you, Mac. And that is agriculture, right? We've been using precision agriculture for a very long time already, but yet there is a ton of runway to go. So how do we help farmers make the best decisions on their land, right? Data, data, data. So there's a ton of opportunity in this intersection. I tell people everywhere, there's nowhere in the world that the intersection of ag tech and geospatial comes together as meaningfully as it does right here in St. Louis. So that's another thing that gets me really excited. With that, I will turn it back to Liz.
All right, thank you so much. So as you've all seen, we've got representatives from all across the ag industry. So we have time for a few questions. If you want to ask the questions and then I'll repeat them so people can hear them on Zoom, that would be great. And it looks like we have a question right here.
600-pound gorilla that hasn't been talked about is China in all of this. And they have the ships too, that probably 80 or 90% of the ships that move product in this world are from China. So what dealings, if any, do you think China should play? What role should they play in this? And I don't know if you're dealing, because Governor Holden, Bob Holden, has a U.S.-China organization that's in this area. You have to contact him, I'd recommend, former Governor Holden, because he's got great contacts with China. I think they have to be brought to the table if they're not. I know there's things we don't like about them, but they're a powerful force. It could be good to help with all of this. But any thoughts about China?
All right, so if you didn't hear that question on Zoom, it is basically China logistics. Talk about that. So Mac, we're going to you. Can you talk to us about China?
You said it was a 600-pound gorilla. I'd be inclined to add a couple zeros to the end of that, but okay. No, I think, certainly over the last 2 years, coming out of COVID and, where we've been, I think from an agricultural standpoint, we've really seen the impact of having that pinch point and so much concentration of shipping, emanating out of China and going to China. I mean, we're export oriented, China's our top overall market for soy, as far as like international markets. But I think, your question is about, hey, how do we think differently about distribution globally? How do we bring about a paradigm shift there? And maybe it is thinking differently about how you're engaging with a country that can be adversarial at times. We just got through the trade war a couple of years ago. We look at raw materials coming out of China that are critical for agricultural production, such as, phosphate rock. I used to work across the street at Monsanto and Bayer, and you need that as an input for producing agricultural chemistries, which are, of course, needed to grow crops on the farm. And of course, you got the fertilizer issues as well. I think I don't know what the right path of engagement is with China. I think that's someone, I think someone who is more well versed in some of those I guess fake sciences, like you would say, as far as like political science. Not that economics isn't also a dismal science unto itself. It is literally called that, right? Because we're meeting infinite wants with finite resources, and that's kind of the crux of the matter we're talking about today. But I think that as we think about food systems and ensuring that the most disenfranchised, the most vulnerable, have more of a buffer, more of a safety net relative to what's been unfolding today and really through the course of time, we have to think differently about systems and distribution. And in the food space, it's not just on the production side. And I think this is, gets tossed about back and forth. I mean, certainly we have farmers who are incredibly efficient, who are excellent stewards of the land, who are able to bring a large volume of products to market. That's the international the surplus that we put in international markets that helps, underpin a lot of the U.S. economy. That's production, but we have to think about the distributive side. And that's where, kind of addressing any food crisis issues related to human health. To tackle that, it's not just about production, it's about, well, how do you think about the movement and transportation of that? It could be vessels. But I think as we're tackling food crises and energy crisis and transportation crises, I think the crux of that is, what do you do in the energy space? How do you build a more resilient energy economy globally? One that is less restricted, I think, by the limits of extraction. How do we think about biofuels? How do we think about, new fuels that can, I think, help advance and bring down some of that cost of distribution? Because again, we bring it back to inflation. All right, that 5% inflation figure that you see globally or across those 191 countries for food, well, a large part of that is incumbent in the distribution costs. So I think we've got a real opportunity as we look to, reduce carbon emissions over the coming balance of the century. Obviously, that's having an adverse impact on climate change. We see, Puerto Rico's on fire. We have flooding in Pakistan, which is, I think, put 3 million acres of key rice production and cotton production just basically out of the equation this year. I mentioned India earlier as a world's top rice exporter. Well, Pakistan's number 2. And you have those adverse impacts on production that go back to climate change. It's all this whole system here. You think about food, you think about energy, you think about climate. It's all netted together. So I know that didn't really get to the heart of the China question, because again, I don't know how to engage there. And I think that's exactly why it's a good question to ask, because it then precipitates additional thinking, additional conversations around how we think about this systemically. But I think it's a great question for the right audience of people, and maybe collectively we can cobble together an answer.
Yep. Can you? So the question is, are there provisions in the current farm bill that would address food security worldwide? And are there things that Congress can do to support food security within the farm bill? Anybody want to take that? You want to take that? Okay, we'll go to Roberta, and then also I'm sure Tom will speak to that as well.
I think the current one, of course, there are provisions in the farm bill that speak to US food support, food stamps, and that's a big part of the overall farm bill. And we're in the process of working on the next farm bill now, and they are, excuse me, looking at ways to improve that we can look more globally without hindering what's done here. Kind of a vague.
Tom, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, when it comes to the farm bill and whatnot, my colleague Maria Kasparian, who is at the United Nations General Assembly this week, would be able to answer better. But I know that the farm bill is the crux of the funding that supports the procurement of therapeutic foods by the US government. It's in Title II. So the Food for Peace, that program is really where at least the US government is offering the majority of its support for the industry that manufactures these products for malnourished children, and supporting that, increasing funding in that, along with, as we've seen this year, supplemental funding. That's what we need. That's what we need from our congressmen and legislators.
So Tom mentioned Food for Peace and Title II. I would add to that the McGovern-Dole Act and Public Law 480. Those are the foundations of the funding that go in and help USAID. This year we engaged the Bill Emerson Trust. I think it was $600 million. It's there for emergencies that we can pull into times of need like we had here. The one thing that I think we have to be a little careful of, and BHA ends up doing some of this, so does USAID, is, the foundation of these programs that we just mentioned, that Tom mentioned, I just mentioned, is in-kind donations, right? What do we have here in the United States? We have food, we have the grains, we have the products to ship over there. But sometimes it's easier to give money, right? And when we give money, I think we lose some of that impact. We lose that supply chain stability that Tom referenced earlier. If they're handing money to Kenya, for instance, and they want to try and produce it locally, I think they lose some of the impact. I think we lose some of the impact. He brought up the China question. Is China involved in global food insecurity? I don't really think so. And I don't think so because they're a vacuum, right? They're sucking in soybeans and corn and oils and all the things. They will invest internationally, but look at what they're doing. They're investing in rail projects in Brazil or road projects. They are investing in infrastructure that's then going to get them something in return. That's what they're doing. We are investing in the human condition worldwide because we are leading that charge. We want that. We want to be the person that the world is looking at going, the United States is going to take care of us. And whenever we send a bag over of corn soy blend to a refugee camp in the Horn of Africa, it's got a great big American flag on it, right? So those people know when that mother is feeding her children, she knows it came from the people here in America, right? So we want to continue that. I guess I'm being selfish here, but I don't want China to send them that bag. And I don't know that they're going to, because China, again, they want something in return. Why, if they're going to give money, what are they going to get back there? Well, we don't take that stance necessarily. We are supporting American agriculture when we do it, and there is a secondary benefit back towards the United States, but we're also doing it because it's the right thing to do.
I'd just like to add one thing to this. So I think we do get a second thing out of it though, and that is when we have, when others have food security, we have national security. So I think that that's another reason that we need to keep doing it. But to me, you talk about the Farm Bill, but just last week's announcements about the multi-billion-dollar investment in climate smart agriculture technologies, the way that we feed these systems is to make sure we have crops that can make it through storms and heat and other things, right? And so it's really, it's two sides of the same coin. We want to keep doing these things, but if we don't have crops to put in these systems, we don't have food to ship to the most vulnerable. So
Want to mention Food for Progress?
Yeah, so WISH works within USDA funding quite a bit. So we work in several different capacities. One is Food for Progress. And so that's more of your typical development style programming meant to develop local value chains. So we've had Food for Progress projects in Ghana focused on the poultry value chain. We currently have one in Cambodia that's focused on aquaculture value chain, and that's really to help build the capacity, the local capacity. We also utilize market access programming funds, foreign market access development funds from USDA, and like all these people have mentioned, developing local capacity, investing in them to be able to produce, strong value chains also helps us. Yes, it creates long-term trade opportunities for us, but it also helps them feed their own population. If they have, strong production and management practices, feed mills are operating at full capacity and efficiently, and they're able to feed, their local population while using U.S. products. So that's just kind of the other side of the more trade side to the development side. But WISH works in both of those, and we're hoping for increased funding in those MAP and FMD provisions.
All right, we have time for one more question over here.
I'm interested about 18 months ago, 2 years, the veggie burgers with the darling sort of stock market, and all that fight seems to have disappeared. Is there still a trend towards cutting out cats with a large schools, a lot of spot growing? Is it growing? Vegetable substitutes, like Tom Steele talked about, the very growing.
Okay, so the question for those on Zoom is, can we talk about trends in plant-based food consumption? You want to talk?
So that was absolutely the darling, as you said, in the last 18 months on the Board of Trade there, the Beyond and the Impossibles and those that came through. There's been a tremendous amount of innovation in those spaces through different processes, as we're isolating proteins and concentrating proteins and trying to imitate mouthfeel and flavoring. And we want a veggie burger that's gonna run grease like a hamburger will when you cook it. That's what we want. And it really comes down to the consumer. And I mean, there's different opinions and arguments on if it's the right thing or not. I raise cattle, so I don't always want to just to take completely over, right? But it's all there, right? I also produce soy protein. So, my stance has always been, we want to give the consumer the option. I think there's probably some innovation still to go in that space. It came out and it was very trendy, and the sales were going higher because you were putting it on the grocery store shelf and the consumer was trying it, right? The consumer said, I want to try this. I think it does fill a need, right? It does change the supply chain dynamic a little bit. I think that what we saw was there wasn't a tremendous amount of repeat buying. A lot of people went out and tried it, and when you've got 300 and some million people in the United States, they went out and bought it, and that gave you that initial growth and the synergy that wanted people to invest in it. And then I think it stalled out a little bit, and I haven't seen the curve lately. I think it started tailing down a little bit, but I can use my own experiences. We've tried the Impossible Burger. We've tried grilling Beyond patties. I didn't necessarily try them for the second time, and that's just my opinion. And I know there's been probably some research in this room that went into that. And I really hope I'm not offending anybody, because I don't want to, because they are a good product. It's just, I think that you saw that consumer excitement, and then I think you saw it wane a little bit. So.
I guess just to add, I mean, the trend, because we look at this all the time, right? I mean, our top usage for soy and volume is going into feed animals, animal ag. Domestically, 60% of our soybean meal goes into chickens, another 20+% into hogs. So, we're obviously fans of, American and international animal agriculture, but that's not to say that we can't have a full mosaic approach, right? There's no one size fits all approach for cultivation. You have GM cultivation, you have organic, you have conventional, and the same thing applies for consumers, right? You've got diversity of choice, and I think being able to offer that diversity of choice is beneficial. Now, as far as some of the companies and the valuations that have gone. I think anytime you have, really this sweeping and catalytic and, like anytime there's a new thing that's out there that is hot, that looks like it can be an investment vehicle, you get these outsized valuations. And then as the industry continues to develop based off of product merit and touch and repeat buying and everything, that's where, the winners, kind of shake out. But, our view is certainly this plant-based market, and soy protein isolates and concentrates playing a critical role in supplying it, is ultimately a very good thing. Like anything we can do to, get more proteins and whole proteins into diets domestically and internationally is going to be a net win for global food security. This is just something that we're collectively working through. Animal protein, fantastic. Plant-based protein that provides protein for people, also fantastic.
All right, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have run out of time, but we're not going to let the panelists escape. They'll be in the back room if anybody wants to ask them questions afterwards. But I want to say thank you so much to the World Affairs Council and to WISH and to the United Soybean Board and to Danforth and to all of our panelists here who are willing to come and speak to all of you today, and to all of you who took the time from your day to join us, and everybody who's on Zoom. Thank you so much for making the time. We really appreciate it. We hope you stay engaged with the World Affairs Council and with all of these organizations, both in St. Louis and internationally, on this food security issue. So thank you very, very much.